Real estate is an amazing, proven path to building wealth, but it is also super expensive. Most people want to invest in real estate, but don't have a pile of cash just lying around to invest with. If this sounds like you are in luck. There are many strategies you can use to buy real estate with little or even no money down. But the reality is, the strategies that you hear about most often to do this were all developed like 10 years ago. So today, we're talking about what low and no money tactics still actually work here in 2025. Hey everyone, it's Dave, head of real estate investing at BiggerPockets, and today we're talking about a super important issue. Our entire mission here at BiggerPockets is to help ordinary Americans achieve financial freedom through real estate. But we can't do that if ordinary Americans can't afford real estate. And that is where low and no money down strategies come into play. We actually even have a best-selling book called Investing with Low and No Money Down that outlines several strategies that you can use. I've used many of them myself. But we have to be real. Some of the ways people were affording real estate 10 years ago aren't really working anymore. But luckily, there are still several great ways people who don't have a lot of cash sitting around can use to invest in real estate and get into the game. Today, we're going to talk about a few of them. We'll talk about creative finance, we'll talk about partnerships, we'll talk about house hacking, and the BRRRR Method, all of which are still applicable in today's economy. Let's start first with what I think is the easiest, most common, but probably the most underrated of all low and no money down strategies, which is partnerships. I know this sounds boring, just partnering with someone that has money, but this is such a common thing for real estate investors to do. This is actually how I got started, and I think the best benefit of partnerships is that it's incredibly flexible. Unlike a mortgage or taking on debt, there aren't really that many rules around how a partnership can be structured. So if you're an enterprising individual who has a lot of knowledge about real estate, there are tons of different ways that you can find different partners that can help you achieve your individual financial goals. Just as an example, when I was 23, I learned a little bit about real estate investing and I really wanted to get into it, but I was waiting tables at the time. I didn't really even have a bank account. I had most of my money was just in cash in my bedside table. But fortunately, I knew some people who had some money and I was able to partner with 3 of them to buy my first deal. And just to give you an example of how partnerships would work, we decided that we were going to split our down payment 4 ways. Each person would pay 25%. And that was all well and good for a normal partnership, but I didn't even have my amount for just 25% of my down payment. So what I did was had another partner lend me the money for my 25% of the down payment, and I used the money that I earned as the managing partner of this investment. I was there every day managing the tenants. I was doing the yard work, I was doing all the maintenance, and I got paid for that. And I took the money, I got paid for that, and I paid off that partner who lent me the money for the down payment. Now, not everyone wants to do this exact thing, but I just want to show you that I literally was able to use partnerships to get into my first real estate deal with no money down. Now, some people have $10,000 or $5,000, and those are things that you can leverage. Maybe you're an agent or a contractor and you can leverage those skills or your time to partner with someone who has the capital to invest. Because frankly, someone needs to have money. Someone in your partnership usually needs to have money unless you're using an owner-occupied strategy, which we'll just talk about in just a couple of minutes. But those are some things for you to think about when you consider investing with low or no money down using a partnership. I also want to mention one other thing. That partnerships is not just for people who have no or low money down. Almost every investor I know, super experienced investors, partner all the time. Real estate is a business. There's a lot of stuff that needs to get done. So developing partnerships is one of the best ways to leverage the things that you're good at and have time for, and then take advantage of and leverage things that you're not maybe so good at, but your partner is good at. So it's not just a way, in my opinion, to get started in real estate, but it's learning a skill of developing partnerships, of building these things out, of networking. That skill won't just help you get started, but will help you through the entirety of your real estate investing career. So does partnerships work as a low and no money down strategy in 2025? Absolutely. This one I think works really well right now and probably will always work as a great strategy. Next, let's move on to our second low and no money down strategy, which is creative finance. This is probably a term you may have heard. It's been talked about a lot in recent years, but it's actually not just one thing. It's a suite of different things that allow you to buy properties basically not using a traditional mortgage. So this includes things like seller financing or subject to or sub to mortgages or assumable mortgages. These are all just different ways of approaching the financing of a property. And let's just talk about three of the most common ones and whether they work or not. The first is seller finance. And this is basically you just make payments directly to the seller instead of the bank. It basically works when the seller of the property owns the property outright. They can't have a mortgage on it themselves. But if the seller maybe has owned a property for 30 or 40 years, they've paid off their mortgage, they might be willing to basically loan you the money to buy the property for them. And this can be a great strategy in 2025 because the seller might be willing to be more flexible on interest rate, price, down payment terms than a bank would. Banks are highly regulated, and even the ones that are private, they have a lot of rules about who they'll underwrite and for how much. But with a seller, it's kind of similar to partnerships in this regard. It's basically whatever you and the seller can agree on, and sometimes that can be with a lower interest rate. So if you're thinking about a great way to get in with low or no money down in 2025, seller financing, I think, is a great option. Another option is something called subject to or sub to, which is when you take over a seller's existing mortgage payments. And this is different than seller financing because there is a traditional mortgage in place, and you as the investor and as the buyer are basically taking over those payments. Similar to seller financing, this is where sort of the creative finance benefits overlap, is that this works well in the type of environment we're in, where we just had really low interest rates. So a lot of homeowners have 2, 3, 4% mortgages, whereas if you were to just go buy this property right now, you'd probably have a 6 or a 7% mortgage. And so if you can just take over the seller's existing mortgage, that could be great because it will help you score a great deal. You could generate higher cash flow. And in some instances, it can actually be really helpful for the seller, and they can walk away from a payment that perhaps they're unable to make. Now, it's worth mentioning, I am not an expert in sub 2, but you should really do your research on this topic because there are a lot of legalities and technicalities that you really need to understand to do this one properly and buy the book. So just make sure if you're gonna do sub 2 to learn more about it. The last one is something called assumable mortgages. This is only going to work with owner-occupied strategies, which I'll talk about just in a minute, but there are certain types of mortgages that you could just take over, and it's just a little bit easier and from a legality standpoint than a sub 2 type of mortgage, but it only works for certain type of mortgages and you actually have to live there. But that's another form of creative finance that can really work. When you look at all three of these tactics within the creative finance sort of bucket, they all have some similarities. They require trust, they require negotiation, they require the right paperwork, but they're incredibly powerful tools for low money down investing. So do they work in 2025? Yes, for sure. But I should also say that they're not always that easy to find. Like if you go on Zillow or Redfin, most of the properties aren't going to be eligible for sub 2 or Zillow or assumable mortgages. You have to work a little bit harder, either by finding your own and generating your own deals flow, or you can work with an agent who might be able to identify these types of properties. All right, let's move on to our third low and no money down, which is house hacking or other owner-occupied strategies. This is another personal favorite of mine for new investors. It's another one I've actually done myself. The idea here is pretty simple. You buy a property, sometimes, ideally, it's a multifamily property like a duplex or a triplex. You live in one unit and you rent out the others to help cover your mortgage. You can also do this with a single family home if you want. You could buy a regular property, live in one bedroom, and rent out the other bedrooms to other tenants. Both of these are owner-occupied strategies. And the reason owner-occupied can be so beneficial, especially if you're looking to invest with low and no money down, is because it allows you to invest while you were still eligible for residential owner-occupied financing. And that is typically better financing. That means you usually get a lower interest rates, and very critically for our conversation today, that means you can typically put less money down. For example, if you live in a property, you can get something called an FHA loan. And with FHA loans, you can actually put as little as 3.5% down. Or there are new products from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that allow you to put 5% down if you're going to live in that property. And so this all of a sudden means the amount of money that you have to bring to the closing table to buy a real estate investment is dramatically lower. If we just use an example of the median home price in the United States, which is about $400,000, if you are putting the traditional 20% down, you're going to need 80 grand for that, then probably another 10 grand for closing costs. But in contrary, if you're putting just 5% down, now you only need $20,000 for your down payment, plus another 10 for closing costs and cash reserve. And so you're talking about investing $30,000 into a property rather than $90,000 into a property. That is enormous savings. And if you're looking for great, really proven strategies to invest with low and no money down, this type of thing can be great. The other thing that I should mention about house hacking that's really nice right now is that you don't necessarily need to cash flow. If you can find a property that cash flows, great, that's even better. But the goal with owner-occupied strategies is just to reduce your overall living expenses. Because right now, if you're renting, let's just say you're paying $1,500 a month in rent, if you could do a house hack where your mortgage payment, after everything's said and done, you wind up paying $500 a month for your living expenses, you're not technically cash flowing because you're still coming out of pocket $500 a month, but you are saving or essentially earning another $1,000 a month by not paying that money in rent. So that means that many more types of properties will be open up for you and will underwrite and will pencil in a way that won't work for traditional home buyers or for investors. It's kind of the sweet spot for a lot of house hackers. So I still think owner occupants is a great strategy for 2025, but, and this is a big but, with high interest rates and sort of lower down payments, it can make your mortgage payments bigger, right? You have high interest rates, and when you're borrowing 95, 97% of the cost of a property, that means your monthly payments are going to be higher. So you really just need to run your numbers. That's not necessarily means you can't do it, but just make sure that that equation that I was just explaining works for you, right? Are you actually lowering your housing expenses by doing this house hack? Back in 2014, 2015, when a lot of these strategies became popular, it was almost a no-brainer. Pretty much any property in any city you could house hack and it would be a better deal for you. In 2025, I just want to be realistic with you all. It doesn't work everywhere. In a lot of really expensive cities, let's just say in San Francisco, Los Angeles, those kinds of cities, it actually still might be better to rent. So you should really check out the numbers. We have some free tools for you on BiggerPockets. You can just go to biggerpockets.com/resources. We have some calculators you can use to make sure house hacking is a good idea for you. But generally speaking, I think in 2025, still a great low and no money way to invest in real estate. All right, let's go on to our fourth and last tactic today to help you get into real estate, even if you don't have piles of cash sitting around. And this is the BRRRR strategy. BRRRR is just spelled BRRRR. It stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. And the general idea here is you buy a fixer-upper. It's kind of like flipping a house, but without selling the house at the end. Instead, you refinance and hold on to the property. So you buy a fixer-upper with short-term financing, you add value through renovations, then you find a tenant, you refinance it with long-term fixed-rate debt, and you pull out a lot of your cash. You do a cash-out refi, and that allows you to extract some of the money or all of the money that you invested into the property as a down payment and for the renovation. And this was super popular in the 2010s through 2022 because people were often able to do what is now known as a perfect BRRRR, which means basically maybe you invested 100 grand into buying the property and renovating it. And then because you added so much value and the market was going up, at the end of this whole project, when you go to refinance your deal, you're able to pull $100,000 out of the deal. So you invested 100 grand, you pulled 100 grand out. It's pretty amazing, right? You basically get to keep that property, but you don't have to keep any of the equity that you had used to buy it. Does the BRRRR strategy still work in 2025? I'd say yes, absolutely it still works, but it's just a little bit different. First, we need to recognize the fact that BRRRR was never a no money strategy. We're talking about low and no money strategies together in this video today. It was never a no money strategy. You needed money to buy the property and you needed even more money to refinance it. That was true in 2014. It was true in 2018. It's true today. The reason people liked it in the 2010s is because it's a great way to scale, right? If you don't have tons of money sitting around to buy that second property or third property or fourth or 10th property, BRRRR gives you a way to buy and hold on to assets and sort of recycle the money that you're using. So does that idea still work in 2025? I'd say yes, but it's just going to be a little bit slower. The availability of these deals where you put in 100 grand and you pull out 100 grand, it's pretty low. It still happens. I talk to people all the time who do it, but it's less common. The more common scenario is that you're going to have to keep some of your equity into this deal. So if you invest 100 grand, maybe when you go and do the cash out refinance, you'll pull 60 grand out or 50 grand out or 40 grand out. Does that mean it's not a good strategy? Absolutely not. You're still buying a great asset that's hopefully cash flowing, and you don't even need to keep all your money into it. You still can pull 40, 50, 60% of your equity out of that deal and then invest it into something else. So I still personally think BRRRR is great. I would still keep doing BRRRRs personally, but I just want people to have appropriate expectations that you're not probably going to be able to do that perfect BRRRR every time. You might not even be able to do it at all right now, which means that if you want to scale, you're going to have to be saving up some money in between these deals from some other source to be able to keep doing BRRRRs as quickly as you may want to. So that is the one caveat about using BRRRR here in 2025. So those were the 4 things that we talked about, and hopefully you could see, are there still low and no money strategies that work? Yes, absolutely. Partnerships are still and pretty much will always be great. Those can be both zero and low down tactics. Creative finance, it's not easy to find, and there are some legal considerations that you need to think through, but it still works, and those can both be zero or low money down. Owner occupied, still great. House hacking, as I said, it's not as much of a slam dunk for absolutely everyone, but I bet for at least 50%, I don't know, maybe 75% of people listening to this, it would still be a great idea. And this could be a really low down strategy. You could put as little as 3.5%. If you're a veteran and can have access to a VA loan, you could put 0% down. So those absolutely still work. And then lastly, we talked about BRRRR, which is no longer as much of this magic easy button as it once was, but it's still great. It's not low or no money down for a single deal. It never was, unless you use a partnership, of course, but it can be a low money way to scale, although slower than it used to be. All right, hopefully this was helpful to you guys because, as I said at the top, real estate, despite it being a weird market, is still the best, most proven path to financial freedom. And there are still so many different tactics that you can use to get into the game, even if you don't have tons of cash lying around. Hopefully the tactics that I've talked about today have given you some ideas for yourself about how you can start investing in real estate here in 2025. For BiggerPockets, I'm Dave Meyer. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.